Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. Good morning today. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. Good morning today. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Daring Dialogues. I am your host, Shantae Charles. Good morning, Lady Barbara. Good morning, Pastor Ben. Good morning, Prophet Jonathan. Good morning, Lady Evelyn. Good morning to those of you who are on YouTube. We did have some difficulties yesterday, so if you want to catch yesterday's broadcast, which I highly recommend you definitely want to catch because we talked about the royal wedding, and I got a chance to share some information on forgiveness and reconciliation. So please catch yesterday's broadcast, but you'll have to do it on Periscope at pscp.tv/Life Nation. And thank you for the congratulations. I saw that somewhere between last night and this morning, we made it over the million heart threshold. So thank you all very, very much for those of you who have been pumping those hearts. In case you didn't know, Periscope kind of pays more attention to your broadcasts. The more hearts that you get, and sometimes they put you on the featured Periscope role. So thank you all for doing that. I appreciate you, appreciate your support, appreciate our listener support. I want to thank my We Dare squad this morning. You all help us to do what we do. June, your next set of things will be going out for those of you who are a part of the We Dare squad. So I just want to say thank you for your continued support. All right, we are back in our Teachable Tuesday. And of course, those of you who have been following along, we have been covering the history of immigration. And I appreciate those of you who are tagging me or tagging Daring Dialogues and letting people know that, hey, we are over here talking about these issues every week on Tuesdays. And we're actually seeing some of these historical policies, right, play out today in present time. We're seeing some of these same reasons for keeping quote unquote foreigners out being represented to a new population and a new generation. The sad thing about it is, though, that these were the same things that they said about those in present day were being said about the ancestors of the very people who are writing these laws and policies trying to keep other people out, which tells me they either didn't get a history lesson from their own family or they're just not learning from the past, which either one is pretty sad. All right. And then we are going to continue in Heart and Soul. We are just about done with the book Heart and Soul. So I'm excited about that. And if we have some time, we're going to begin to add in some of our newer books, our newer reads, How Africa Shaped the Christian Mind. Because we've been talking about that Christianity is an African religion. A lot of times people try to separate Christianity out from other religions that came out of Africa, other worship styles per se that came out of Africa, and people try to say, oh, well, Christianity is not really an African religion, when that is not true. All right, so we want to start reading this, How Africa Shaped the Christian Mind, and then we're also going to introduce you to Dr. Claude Anderson's newest book, A Black History Reader, and the subtitle is 101 Questions You Never Thought to Ask Concerning Our History. So it's actually in question and answer form, and I really like the format. So these are two books that we will begin to integrate into Tuesdays as we move out of these two books from today. All right. So let's go and let's start with our immigration piece. Let's take a look. And last time, again, we started talking about communism and how there was a huge fear about people coming into the country that held these particular views, these political views, and all of that good stuff. Y'all forgive me for messing with my hair. It's getting on my nerves. All right. So we talked about how people were not allowed to immigrate because they were people who were allowed to immigrate. It was because they were anti-communist, and those who were or held communist views were given a hard time about immigrating to our country. Good morning to my lovely husband, who I am keeping in my prayers today, and I ask that you all do the same. So we have been talking first about Cuba, and I believe we're going to continue that talk. So let us begin. Anelia Sleliga, was a young woman who did not have to return to communist Poland. She was 19 when she was taken by Nazi soldiers and forced to labor on a farm in Germany. After the war, she spent 4 years in a military facility run by the United States and its allies. She was admitted to the United States as a refugee in 1949. For me, she said, being in America, the freedom was the thing, that you can go to church, that you can speak, that you can write, that you can talk. Liga explained. In Poland, people from the cities didn't respect ordinary people from the country. I found it's not like that over here. You can go to your priest, shake hands, talk freely like I talk to you or anyone, but in Poland, you couldn't. And it was a free Poland when I grew up. But there's freedom, and then there's real freedom. Several years ago, I went back to Poland, and my sister said to me, "Aren't you sad to go back to America?" I said, "No, I'm not sad. I know I was born here, but America is my country now." After a failed revolt by Hungarians against the Soviet Union in 1956, 35,000 Hungarians came as refugees to the United States. I was in my second year of high school, recalled Ava Radel-Hart. That night, the Russians came in with tanks, and there was a lot of fighting. Many people were shot dead on the street. I wasn't allowed to go out. My family arranged for a guide to help us escape. We took a train to a city near the Austrian border. We had to take another small train to a village. The Russian guards were there with questions, so our guide had us go to the back of the train and then under the train in the dark to nearby houses. We were hiding and walking in the dark through the gardens and gates until we got to this forest on the border. We were still in Hungary. The Russians set flares to catch the escapees. Each time a flare went up, we hit the ground so they wouldn't see us, and the only thing we had was the clothes on our backs. Our guide finally took us to the first place that had a light on when we crossed the border. Radel-Hart waited with other refugees to be flown out of Munich, Germany. They played the American and Hungarian national anthems as we were getting on the airplane, she remembered. In the early 1960s, Cubans like Alejandro became coming in large numbers. In 1965, when Fidel Castro said that Cubans with relatives who had immigrated were free to leave, President Lyndon Johnson declared to the people of Cuba that those who seek refuge here in America will find it. Our tradition as an asylum for the oppressed is going to be upheld. This was an open invitation. Many of the first wave of Cubans who came to the United States believed the communist government would fall and eventually they could return to Cuba. Many Americans believe this too. Yet this has not happened, and there have been several waves of immigration. In 2015, however, President Barack Obama opened up diplomatic relations with Cuba, beginning a new era. And I believe this year or last year, President Trump closed those doors to Cuba and ended diplomatic relations with Cuba. So now it's like the progress that they had been making towards establishing a relationship, that progress has now been again reversed. One of the most famous immigration waves from Cuba lasted from April 15th to September 26th, 1980. Castro again announced that Cubans who wanted to immigrate could leave. They crowded the port of Mariel and sailed out in makeshift boats. This became known as the Mariel Boat Lift. About 125,000 Cubans made it to the United States. Castro had sent some criminals from Cuban prisons as well, upsetting the Americans. In 1984, a number of Cubans were returned to their country, but most stayed here as refugees. In 1995, the United States and Cuba reached an agreement that no fewer than 20,000 legal U.S. visas would be given to Cubans each year. Those trying to reach America illegally by boat were sent back to Cuba if they were captured at sea by the U.S. Coast Guard. But if they landed in the United States, they were usually accepted as political refugees. To me, the decision to come to America was not about money, said Emilio Estefan, who immigrated from Cuba when he was 15. He became a famous record producer. I always looked at the United States as a place that represented freedom, that you have the right to free expression, the right to have any dream. But to me, more than anything else as a kid, I was afraid to live in a communist country. When we used to have dinner or lunch, we had to talk quietly because my mom or dad were afraid that someone was listening to them. So my whole motivation was really fear. Fear that I should live in a country where I'm afraid to talk or have an opinion. Well, welcome to America 2018. Cold War politics produced another large group of refugees, South Vietnamese. Fighting in Vietnam started after World War II. The Vietnamese people sought to gain independence from France. This was achieved in 1954, but the country was split into North Vietnam and South Vietnam. Troops from North Vietnam, which was communist, continued to battle South Vietnam, whose government was friendly to the United States, wanting to rule Vietnam as one country. The United States supported the South Vietnamese, and by the early 1960s was sending American soldiers to what became known as the Vietnam War. Although peace agreements were signed in 1973, by then most Americans had withdrawn. Fighting continued until 1975 when the communists were victorious. Remember, this became a very controversial war. It became a war where people said, that we didn't have any business over there. It became the war that we did not win. There's also a movie that recently came out called The Post, which I think a lot of people might want to go check that movie out. It was kind of under the radar. It wasn't promoted very highly, but it is about the founding of the Washington Post and why the Washington Post went from a local newspaper to a national and even world-recognized newspaper. Wanted to go see that, but forgot to see it. Yes. If you are interested in war and the politics behind war and what actually happened with that war, you want to see that movie. All right. I won't tell what they share in it, but I don't think a lot of people in our generation understood what happened. So, yeah, go back and look at that movie. It's called The Post. South Vietnamese who had helped the Americans from political leaders to ordinary people were terrified to stay in their country. The United States evacuated many prominent supporters in emergency rescue operations. On April 28, 1975, my extended family group was driven to Tan Son Nhut Air Base, recounted Trong Nguyen, who had been an officer in the South Vietnamese Army and worked for American Aid Organization. There was a large crowd of maybe 10,000 people waiting at the terminal. We kept our kids close to us. Around 5 a.m., C-46 helicopters landed in front of us. People hurried to the helicopters. My own family was divided onto 3 different aircraft. We landed on the huge boat, the Pioneer Contender. I had mixed emotions. I felt that we were going to heaven, the United States, but I already missed my country. I realized that I would never see Vietnam again. The family settled in Chicago, where they were first met with hostility. When I worked as a janitor and a coworker told me, Trong, do you know that America is overpopulated? We have more than 200 million people. Well, now we have over 330. We don't need you. Go back to where you belong. I was shocked to hear people trying to chase us out. I thought, who is going to feed the children? Trump's wife defended herself to coworkers in a factory. Vietnam is a small country, but we did not come to America to look for jobs. We're political refugees and we can't go back home. Within 10 years, however, the Vietnamese community grew. What had once been a slum area of Chicago had more than 50 Vietnamese family-owned businesses. There are also stores owned by Cambodians, the Lao, Chinese, Ethiopians, a Jewish kosher butcher, 2 Hispanic grocers, a black record shop, and an American bar. There are Japanese, Thai, Indian, and Mexican restaurants, and a McDonald's. The early 1980s neighborhood that Trong described is the melting pot that Americans see themselves as being. After the first wave, South Vietnamese continued to flee. In 1978 and 1979, they began leaving secretly in boats, many of which were dangerous to travel in. These refugees became known as the Vietnamese boat people. The term included Cambodians and Laotians who had been involved in the Vietnam War, and also the Chinese who felt persecuted in communist Vietnam. Boat people continued to leave into the 1990s. The United Nations records that about 1/3 died at sea from storms, starvation, and attacks by pirates. More than 1 million lived in refugee camps in Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands, some of them for many years. Tuan Nguyen, not related to Trong, paid 7 bars of gold so his family could leave Vietnam on a small boat with 120 other refugees in 1989. He and his wife had 3 children. We didn't know if anyone would pick us up or if they'd send us back to Vietnam or if we'd die on the ocean, he said. They spent 16 years in a refugee camp in the Philippines. He had no rights as a citizen and worked 13 hours a day selling perfume and soap from door to door. In 2005, the United States finally agreed to accept him and his family. It had been his dream, but when he arrived in California, he said, "It's not a dream for me, it's for my children. To grow up here, to get an education, to become the best citizens they can be, that is my goal, to give them a better life." In 1979, the Islamic Revolution toppled the non-religious but non-democratic government in Iran. The United States has supported this government and accepted some Iranian refugees, many of them who were wealthy or middle class, educated, and already held professional statuses into the United States. An Iranian girl named Roya immigrated to the United States in the early 1980s with her parents. They came seeking a country with civil liberties and a better economic opportunity. The family kept practicing its Islamic faith. I really didn't have issues with fitting in on the outside. I didn't have a noticeable accent and didn't look or dress much differently than most American children. On the inside, however, I felt like I fit in anywhere until I made little safe spaces for myself. Just like many immigrants before her, refugees like Roya experienced prejudice. I've been rejected for different reasons, the worst one being ignorance about who I am by teachers and classmates. I now realize that there are all kinds of people, and you should look for the most understanding ones whenever possible. I would like Americans to know that I didn't have an oil well in my backyard, and I didn't ride a camel to school, even though I saw a lot of camel caravans. The United States frequently changes policies about different groups of political refugees, especially in emergencies. After a war or genocide, such as what the Jewish people experienced during World War II, Congress can pass laws or the president can change rules to allow people from a specific country to come here. In the early 1990s, as the country of Yugoslavia was breaking up, War broke out between different ethnic groups trying to establish independence. The United States accepted 131,000 from what became Bosnia. In 1999, it allowed 20,000 from Kosovo under the attack of the Serbian government that ruled them to come to America. In 1998, when I was about 17 years old, nearby towns and villages were bombed, recalled a young man from Fadum in Kosovo. Fadum is an ethnic Albanian and a Muslim. With Serbian soldiers pointing guns at us, my family walked out of our house. There already were about 3,000 people walking down the road. When I looked back, I could see that our house was on fire. One of my relatives was shot. Fadum and his family made it to a refugee camp in Macedonia and then eventually to the United States. Now married and a father, he helps new refugees who come to America. Some Americans are not happy with refugees in their communities. In the 70s, when the South Vietnamese refugees were coming to the United States, Robert Nagza of California Health and Welfare Agency predicted, if we get a small number, we're going to take care of them. But no American would welcome Vietnamese if, in fact, they're going to disrupt the economy and the housing market. A Gallup poll in 1975 found that 54% of Americans were opposed to taking in Vietnamese refugees and only 36% in favor. Half of the people living in Clarkston, Georgia in 2007 were refugees. They began to be placed there by resettlement agencies in the late 80s. In 2007, the high school had students from more than 50 countries. Yet, Clarkston's mayor, Lee Swaney, forbade anyone from playing soccer in the town park. There will be nothing but baseball down here as long as I am mayor, he said. Those fields were not made for soccer. To Swaney, baseball was an American game and soccer was not. Therefore, the refugees were not welcome to practice a sport they enjoyed. Many Americans do, however, believe we should accept refugees. Church groups and nonprofit agencies are active in helping them. Refugees, many of whom arrive having lost everything, become some of the most resilient and devoted citizens we have, wrote Senator John Kerry in 2010. He went on to become our Secretary of State. The difference between these individuals and so many sitting in refugee camps is that a new country took a chance on them. Which begs the question, we love to take chances on new people coming in, but I would like for America to take a chance on the people that are already here, whose ancestors built this country. Selah, Selah. We're going to stop there for now, and we will come back to close this out on next week. I want to move to our next book. Speaking of those of us that this country needs to take a chance on, what happens when you're a refugee in your own country? I find it interesting because people are fleeing from other countries because they're not being treated as citizens. They're not being treated human. They are, their houses are being burned down. They're being persecuted for their faith, or they're being persecuted for their ethnicity. And so they flee to our country, who's doing the same thing to its citizens. Does anybody else find that ironic? And then when they get here, some of them, when they get here, they realize that our government treats black people the way they were treated in their own country. And then because they're here by the graciousness of America, guess who they side with? I'll wait. Guess who many of them side with? They're obviously going to side with the person who gave them the freedom from their own oppressive government and their own government that mistreated them. So on one hand, when people come over, all right, they are given freedoms that they didn't have in their country. They are given America offers to them as refugees. They don't necessarily have that goodwill towards people who have already been here. These things. So they do notice. They are taking notice of this. All right. We're on chapter 12, which is called Revolution. And we're going to end with the epilogue. So we are just about done with this book, and we'll hopefully be able to introduce one of the books that we're going to add in on Tuesdays. Revolution. We knew we were going to change the world. Angela Davis. This is a picture of the Southern Woolworths counter, Southern Woolworths Cafe. Because yes, people are coming over. They're being invited to escape the trauma and the wars and the tragedy of their own country. And while this is happening, our very own government is refusing those same liberties and freedoms to the ancestors of the people who have been here. So, something good had started in Montgomery and it spread all across the country. Young people grabbed hold of the movement the grown folks had started and took it over. Sounds like 2018. To show how different they were from their parents' generation, they started wearing their hair long, their clothes became louder and more colorful, and the music was even louder and more soulful. The sounds of angry electric guitars and powerful drums echoed through our neighborhoods as we sang along with James Brown, "Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud." And Sam Cooke, "A change is gonna come." College kids started to challenge the segregation laws, starting with the Woolworths Cafe in Greensboro, North Carolina. 4 black students just went in there and sat down at the white folks' lunch counter. They were later put in jail, but people heard about it and started doing it all over the South, going into whites-only movie theaters, going into whites-only pools, going into churches, libraries, and such. Did you hear that, people? Going into white churches, and they were led out with handcuffs. And such, trying to break Jim Crow. So when people ask the question, why do they say, I hate the term white church and black church. Why can't it just be church? Well, guess what? We didn't start that division. As a matter of fact, we did this. We tried to counter it. All right. And some of us got led away in handcuffs trying to integrate white churches. So I need the pastors to tell all the history. Okay. Don't just talk about the lunch counters. Don't just talk about the pools. Don't just talk about the libraries and the movie theaters. Also talk about the churches that black people tried to integrate during this time, and the churches did not want black people in them. All right? All the history, all of it, all of it, all of it, all of it. And you still have some places like that today. You go in, my husband and I have been to a few. We've been invited by our white brothers and sisters to go to their church. And then we go to their church, and then our white brothers and sisters find out how bigoted the members are in their church because they invited us. So some things don't get exposed unless there's an invitation. That's a whole other sermon. I'm going to say that one more time. Some things don't get exposed unless there's an invitation. So Dr. King joined them too, And there were even a number of us older folks who felt brave enough to get on board. We called ourselves Freedom Riders, and we filled cars and buses with white and black folks and rode all over the South, breaking the segregation laws. They rode all over the South with the intention of breaking the law, with the intention of breaking an unjust, immoral law. This is for my fellow white brothers and sisters who like, oh, it is what it is. These are just the laws, and we just have to abide by them. Well, when you recognize that a law is unjust and a law is immoral, what do you do? So if a law was passed tomorrow saying that the youngest white male child in every household must be taken into custody and put in a refugee camp, how soon would white people get out in the streets and be protesting and burning up stuff and marching with their AK-47 saying, "You're not going to take my child"? But it's the law. All right? So we have to think. We have to think. If it was an unjust law that affected you and it affected your children and it affected your life and it affected your generations, would you not protest it? You most certainly would, which is what they did. So they went all over the South breaking the segregation laws. This was a very dangerous thing, mind you. Those of us who were lucky were merely arrested and put in jail for a few days. But many others were beaten very badly by policemen, helped along by mobs of white townspeople, and their buses and cars were also burned. 3 years later, Ku Klux Klan members killed not only black folks, but some of the white people and some of the Jewish people who were helping organize the movement and to get black people registered to vote. And believe me when I tell you that it made everybody feel a little scared. But we kept moving forward despite the fear, despite the opposition, we kept moving forward. Like Dr. King told us, we've come too far to turn back now. There were other leaders in the movement like A. Philip Randolph, Malcolm X, Adam Powell, Fannie Lou Hamer, and Medgar Evers. But it was Dr. King who spoke the loudest of all. His message was clear. His message was clear. Here it is. We cannot win this battle with violence. We cannot win it with hate. We can only win it with persistence, love, and nonviolence, and by reminding the nation and the people on Capitol Hill that our forefathers made a promise of freedom and justice for all when they signed that paper. We would become the nation's moral conscience and fight the battle for justice and equality. All right? There's been a couple of instances on last week and even yesterday where you have this cynical attitude that has developed among some black people who say, well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if we march because they don't pay attention to our marching. Listen, here's another Martin Luther King quote in case you don't know it. Marching is for us to be seen. Economic boycotts is for us to be felt. You don't do one and not the other. It's called combined protest action. All right? So marching is for us to be seen. Boycotting economically is for us to be felt. All right? Marching is for us to be seen. Economic boycott is to, as somebody said, hit them in the pockets. And now, because we're doing it consistently, hello? Because black people are showing up and consistently boycotting people who come incorrectly, guess what's happening? People are automatically saying, we better shut down this bigotry We better get on it. We better apologize. We better come out and make a statement. All of which was not happening, by the way, 6 years ago when this stuff first started happening. But people are starting to see a consistency with Black people when they say, we're going to not purchase your product. So it is making a difference. All right. Dr. King marched us all over the South trying to get the attention of the whole country. We just loved him and we were willing to follow him anywhere. When he spoke, his powerful voice gave you chills. It shook your spirit and got you excited and calmed you when you were scared. He was patient and took everyone, even the children. And he was also a charismatic leader, which didn't hurt one bit. He was able to convince not just those who were part of his particular ethnicity, but he was able to convince other people to join along with the movement. In May of 1963, Dr. King and his team went down to Birmingham, Alabama, the most dangerous place in the South for Black folks. They went to work marching people all over the city and got everyone's attention when they marched 600 children through Kelly Ingram Park, also known as the Children's March. Most were teenagers, but some of the children were as young as 6 years old. They skipped school to march on downtown Birmingham, holding hands and singing. Now, when the children did this, right, there were, of course, at the time, parents and teachers who were concerned about their children skipping school to participate in this march, right? Fast forward to 2018, and what do we have as a result of this legacy? We have a result of children marching out of their schools to protest certain things about that's going on in this country. So even though people at the time had some disagreement with how they were protesting, the reality is many of the protests of today can credit their groundwork or credit their foundation and credit their tactics to the civil rights movement. Okay? So let's not forget that part of history, that children leaving school to protest in the middle of the day is not something new. It's grounded on a foundation because it worked. Policemen ordered them to stop and then sicked their dogs on these children and sprayed them with fire hoses. So when you see those images, those iconic images of the fire hoses and the dogs being used on children, when most people look at those images, at first you think it's adults that they're doing this to, but they were actually doing it to children. All right, which is what sparked such a strong wave of support, and it also sparked a strong backlash against this particular town. That water was strong enough to knock the bark off of a tree, and they turned it on children. It knocked them down, it ripped their shirts off, and it even pinned them up against buildings and trees. It was downright shameful. Pictures of the march were shown on television screens and in newspapers all over the world. President John F. Kennedy had no choice but to settle things in Birmingham. Listen, there was a price that people paid to settle things in their towns. It did not just magically happen. They did not just wistfully think that things were going to get better. They had to actually take some physical action, and people put their bodies on the line in order for us to have some of the freedoms we have today, some of the rights that we have today. And now, so very carelessly and nonchalantly, our Supreme Court and other members of our legislative bodies are slowly but surely rolling back the rights that people put their bodies on the line for, that benefit everybody. Later that summer, Dr. King, Dr. Philip Randolph, and several leaders in the movement invited people from all over the country to join them in Washington, D.C. for a peaceful demonstration on the Mall to try and pass a civil rights bill to promote civil rights and economic equality for Black people. So, when you see all of these different interest groups converging on the Mall in Washington, D.C. for peaceful demonstrations, that too was built on the foundation that was established through the civil rights movement. That means that someone else paved the way for what we do today. Just about everybody I knew, he says, made the trip. We rode on a bus for hundreds of miles all the way to Washington. It was such a glorious day. We filed off the bus and joined a parade of people who were marching and singing, headed for the Lincoln Memorial, where great crowds of people were crammed together on the Mall. Black, white, brown, red, yellow folks were everywhere. It seemed like the whole world had showed up. It was almost like a dream. Seeing so many people there made us realize that we were not alone in this struggle for equality. There were several speakers throughout the afternoon, but what I remember most is when Dr. King spoke. His voice rose and fell and echoed over a sea of people as he spoke about his dream for America. He shouted, "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. Free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last," Dr. King roared. By the time he finished, people on the Mall were hugging, they were shouting, they were swaying, and they were crying. It was a magnificent speech. It felt like we all got a little church on that Wednesday afternoon. It wasn't long before President Kennedy promised to send a civil rights bill to Congress to guarantee equal rights to all American citizens, no matter what their color. And that sealed the deal on his death. He never got a chance to see it through, though. Just a few months later, he was shot and killed on a visit to Texas. President Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act into law in 1964 and the Voting Rights Act the following year. The government had finally said to the world that Jim Crow was dead. Here we are in 2018, and our government is saying to the world, hey, we'd like to resurrect Jim Crow. And there are a lot of people who are still alive who fought for those rights during the civil rights time, who are now saying, over my dead body, are you going to resurrect Jim Crow? All right. The time had come at last when the words written by our forefathers that all men are created equal were honored by our government. It had taken hundreds of years, millions of lives, millions of marches, martyrs, protests, wars, and much more for America to come closer than ever before to becoming what it was meant to be. And let me say this, we are not yet there. We have not yet become, as a nation, what we were meant to be. That's why people are still fighting. That's why people are still protesting. That's why people are still demanding equal rights. Lord knows there were plenty more battles to fight, many more struggles and troubles to overcome. But at last, the idea that everybody counts was within reach. It was a glorious victory for all Americans and the beginning of a new struggle for every American to ensure that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal. One of his beautifully done paintings of Dr. King at the March on Washington. Epilogue. Beautiful. And does our voting practices need some help? Yes. They do. But better to have something to tweak than to have nothing at all. Can I say that again? Better to have something to tweak, to adjust, to change, than to have nothing at all, which is what we had before. No say. I'm going to say it one more time for people who don't understand the importance of voting, especially voting locally. Better to have something to change, better to have something to tweak, better to have something to improve, better to have something to adjust than to have nothing at all. And your life at the whim of people who don't see you as a human being at all, and you have no say in the voting or political process and the policies that are enacted that affect your life every day. Epilogue. Come years later, we saw more terrible wars. We saw leaders like Dr. King, Malcolm, Shabazz, and Bobby Kennedy shot and killed by people who Dr. King, as he put it, cannot disagree without being disagreeable. We watched cities burn, a man walk on the moon, presidents be impeached, and the Berlin Wall come down. Millions more Americans march on Washington. We followed controversial elections and watched broken levees drown most of a city. There'd be plenty of trouble in the world, but also a lot of joy too. Black folks began to do things that only decades before we hadn't dreamed of. African-American generals commanded great armies for the first time. Black mayors and governors were selected in large cities. There were Black principals of integrated schools, managers and owners of major professional sports teams. African-American writers and actors, artists and directors won Nobel Prizes and Academy Awards. And we saw the first Black Supreme Court justice and astronaut. There were plenty of firsts, but the best was saved for last. 45 years after Dr. King spoke on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, I marched my old legs to the polls, along with millions of other Americans, to vote in a historic election. It was the first time that let me put this in quotes, African-American Barack Obama had won the Democratic nomination and appeared on the national ballot for president of the United States. As I cast my vote, I thought about my grandfather Pap, who didn't live to see this moment, and my 3 children and 2 brothers who did. I thought about my mother and my father and my aunts and my uncles. I thought about Abe Lincoln and Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman. I thought about Presidents Kennedy and Johnson, Dr. King, Thurgood Marshall, the Freedom Riders, the Marchers, and all of the people who lived and died so that I might walk into this booth and cast my vote. I thought about them all and I smiled. And as I walked away, I closed my eyes and said, thank you. Our centuries-long struggle for freedom and equal rights had helped make the American promise of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness a reality. We have come a mighty long way and we still have a good ways to go. But that promise and the right to fight for it is worth every ounce of its weight in gold. It is our nation's heart and soul. And that, my friends, is the end of this book. Heart and Soul, Brigadier Nelson. All right. Let's start today with Dr. Claude Anderson's book, since it's in Q&A form. And it's a Black History Reader, 101 Questions You Never Thought to Ask. So if you all have been reading along with us, you can now add Heart and Soul along with the capitalist code to the books that you have read for the year. All right. Dr. Claude Anderson has got this divided up into several sections, which I like because you can kind of choose a section and go through and work through the questions in there. He's got foundation concepts, current issues, rethinking social integration, the dark side of the Constitution, historical ironies, the politics of race, profiling presidents and authorities, immigration and naturalization, sights and signs of the times, Black economic empowerment, forgotten champions and defenders, Blacks and religion, Black reparations and affirmative action, science and medical experiments, birth of the new classes. So because we've touched on and been talking about immigration today, let me go to his questions on immigration first. Question number 1 he has in here, and it probably is going to take up the rest of our time. Question number 1. We haven't as a question. Why are the doors of immigration open to Hispanics, but closed mainly closed to Haitians? Anybody know why? Anybody got a guess? Wild guess before we read and get started? I give you a moment to think about it. Anybody know? Why are the doors of Haitian immigration open to Hispanics, but closed to Haitians? Bingo. Still salty? Yep. Skin color? Yes. All right. The primary reasons, Dr. Claude Anderson writes, the primary reasons immigrants from Haiti are treated differently than Hispanics are skin color and the country's historical role in the development of the Western world. The welcome mat for immigrants has always been based upon a ranking order of skin color, ethnicity, and country of origin. That is important. All right. Again, who gets in first is based on ranking order of skin color, ethnicity, and country of origin. Hispanics, whether in Europe or the Americas, have always been classified as white people speaking Spanish. Therefore, they are entitled to preferential immigration into the United States from any country of origin. Did you get that? So they're not classified as Latino. When they get here, they are classified as whites who speak Spanish. For Haitians and other persons of African descent, the welcome mat did not exist except as slaves. The bias against Haitian immigrants and refugees has a deep-seated historical element that caused great fear in whites in the U.S., for Haiti was the world's first free Black nation in the entire Western Hemisphere. And what does that say? That says historically that if you try to enslave them, they will fight back. Yeah, they will fight back, and they're willing to fight back, and they're willing to overthrow tyrannical government, and not only overthrow them, but win. All right? So if you've ever wondered why there's a hesitation to allow more Haitians into the country than we currently have, that's some of the reservation. When Black slaves in Haiti successfully revolted against their French slaveholders, they became a free, independent nation, the first and only instance where slaves were ever able to break free and establish their own independent nation. Let me see if I can bring that comment back up. Gosh, I can't bring it up. Someone made a comment over here on my YouTube and it was going away as I was trying to read it. If you can, try to put that up again and I'll read it out loud. No other Black nation on earth had ever rebelled and overthrown their white colonial powers. The slave revolt in Haiti hit hard in America. President George Washington and Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson, who were slave owners, supported France in its efforts to suppress the Haitian slave revolt, but to no avail. It is remarkable that Black Haitians defeated Napoleon Bonaparte's army, which was France's supposedly most effective military force. They also defeated the military forces of England and Spain. white slaveholders in the U.S. feared slave revolts would ignite physical hostilities between white society and the millions of blacks they held as slaves. The military success of the slaves in Haiti did have a profound effect on slavery and a lasting impact on the way the United States treats Haitians today. Slavery was legalized as an official institution in 1789 with ratification of the U.S. Constitution. 2 years later, in August 1791, Haitian slaves revolted and took control of the island. 4 months later, on December 8th, 1791, frightened American slave owners persuaded the U.S. Congress to enact, what do you think? Acting. So shortly after the Haitian slaves won, Americans enacted the Second Constitutional Amendment. You know, that Second Amendment that everybody keeps talking about? You know, the right to bear arms. Well, what was the history around the right to bear arms? It was because Haiti had just kicked butt and established their independence as a nation. So they ran to enact this Second Constitutional Amendment that granted white citizens the right to have militias and required all, can we say all white males between the ages of 18 and 45, which is why people are bucking against increasing the minimum age to 21, between the ages of 18 and 45 years old to bear arms in case of slave revolts. Notice they don't talk about that last piece of the sentence. They keep saying, I have the right to bear arms. I have the right to bear arms. I have the right to bear arms. Finish the sentence though. I have the right to bear arms in case of slave revolts. The fear of possible slave revolts was omnipresent and triggered Southern states to organize what's still being organized today, and that is militias. So we still have people in this country that operate from this mindset that if the Negroes in America get out of line, we have the right to bear arms and organize our well-regulated militias to put them back in line. There were a few slave revolts in the U.S., but none of them succeeded. The key point in this historical recitation is that the fear generated by the successful Haitian revolt produced a hate and fear in white people towards Haitians, which is really interesting. Haiti paid a high price for its military successes. The country was reviled, feared by all white nations of the world, precisely for its successful slave revolt, and Haiti was therefore isolated and crushed into deep debt and poverty. That's what's going on in Haiti, by the way. The difference between the treatment of Hispanics and the treatment of Haitians seeking citizenship in America reflects racism and the lasting memories of the astounding victory in the Western Hemisphere by the poor, almost defenseless, dark people in the most isolated nation in the Americas. The punishment to Haiti for its military achievement and the embarrassment it inflicted on world superpowers is incorporated into America's enduring international policy. For instance, the 1823 Monroe Doctrine defined any intervention by external powers in the politics of the Americas as a potentially hostile act against the United States. This prohibits Haiti from getting much foreign political aid from other countries. They cannot help themselves, and the U.S. will not allow others to help them. So when we talk about doctrines of devils, here's one, 1823 Monroe Doctrine. As recently as May 2017, the Washington Post reported that President Donald Trump's administration was treating Haitians in this country differently from other immigrants. To decide whether Haitians here in the temporary protected status should be allowed to stay in the U.S., the administration is taking the unusual step of seeking data on criminal background and Haitian use of welfare benefits. So they are being specifically targeted to be removed. All right. So we have actually, if you all would permit me maybe about 5 minutes, I want to finish this up because it actually ties into what we just read with immigration in the other book. So it kind of reinforces it. All right. So if you can hang with me. The first naturalization law of 1790 permitted immigration only by Europeans, as we've been reading, okay? In the 1960s, Congress modified that law and immigration policies. It replaced skin color preferences with country of origin preference, ranking order based upon the historical number of immigrants who had migrated from Europe, Asia, the Middle East, and African countries. Since the ancestors of Black slaves, again, language, since the ancestors of Black slaves were never officially classified or registered as immigrants, they cannot call us immigrants. And some of us don't understand that, but it will become very important when they do this 2020 census, okay? They cannot call us immigrants. The immigration quota for persons from Black nations like Haiti was set at less than 1%. Civil rights leaders who had started making the shift from Black to minority to people of color and other euphemisms went along with the change in immigration law from European white to country of origin. The civil rights leaders did not have the support of sophisticated think tanks and were unable to foresee the devastating impact the new immigration policies would have on Native Black people. The new immigration policy gave preferences to persons from Mexico and poor Central and South American countries seeking political asylum rather than economic opportunities. Using the new immigration focus in the 60s, John F. Kennedy administration initiated and approved what we read today, a Cuban refugee program, which opened the floodgates to millions of Cubans, which obtained citizenship in America for political as well as economic opportunities. Nearly 100% of Cuban refugees were classified as white. And so if you are living in South Florida, in Miami, in Fort Lauderdale, Pastor Ben can attest to this, all right, there is a dislike or a dis-ease that happens down there between Black people and the Cuban population. Why? Because when the Cubans came in, they were classified as white. And when you are white in a country that treasures white supremacy, then you're classified as white, then you do what the white people do. Get it? Because remember, white is not a race. It's a social construct that allows certain people to have privileges above everyone else. So even a Cuban who may be darker in complexion than me, who may be classified as white, would get more economic privileges. All right. Hope everybody understands that. So only a few dark or very Black Cubans were entering the United States during this time. Many of the Cubans that entered looked European. All right. Some of them had blonde hair, blue eyes, blonde hair, green eyes. So they fit the phenotype of what we would say whiteness looks like, even though they were Cuban. And if you go to Miami now, you'll see people who look white until they start speaking, and they're speaking fluent Spanish, and then you realize, oh, wait, they're Cuban. But again, the United States government, when they came in, they classified them as white. Okay. And why does the United States government do that? It's for population reasons, right? It's to report a certain group of people as having a certain a number of demographic in the country as a whole. So then you have to ask yourself, when people say how many white people are there in this country, if you really start breaking down who's actually from a European country, it's actually less than people realize, because when America brings people in from other countries and labels them white, they're adding to their own population role. And there's a new article that just came out expressing that the population of white Americans is diminishing, I believe, in 17 different states. Their population is dwindling. All right. So this is all about politics. This is all about using those numbers to shape policy in the favor of the quote unquote dominant society in the United States. Lastly, Haitian refugees have been treated with extreme prejudice. Their escape boats have been intercepted. They've been pushed back into the water. They have left people to drown. Those who made it to the U.S. have been deported, incarcerated, and rejected because of the interpretation that they seek economic opportunities rather than political asylum. Until Haitian refugees are reclassified and treated in a similar manner to Hispanics, including Cubans, an ethnic group within the category of Hispanics, Haitian refugees will continue to be treated with extreme bias. The 40 million legal and illegal Hispanic immigrants who came to this country did not come to seek asylum. They came here to seek money and a better life. The basis for rejecting Haitians is historical fear, inherent racism, Haiti's abysmal poverty, its African-based culture, low education levels, and most importantly, because an increase in Haitians would increase the political and economic potential of Black America. The nation's doors are not now and have never been open to all who seek the American dream. This has been another episode of Daring Dialogues, and I have been your host today. I hope that I have said something today to get you thinking. All right. I hope that I've said something today to empower you as you are listening and hearing these talks about immigration, that you will speak from a place of knowledge and not from a place of assumption. All right. And that when you hear about your brothers and your sisters, where you are living, who are dealing with unfair policies, especially the Haitian immigrants, that you will speak up in your own community, especially if you are in a community where the Haitian population is prevalent. All right. Please make a difference by speaking up, by contacting your representatives and telling them how you feel about their treatment as opposed to everyone else's treatment that has been coming in. All right. I want to thank you again for your time and attention. Please hit the share button, and thank you all for tuning in. We'll be back tomorrow and we'll be on our relationships topics. We'll be covering marriage and the history of dating. Remember, light is the most daring opposition to darkness. So please go out today and be light. Matter of fact, lead the way.